Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning we'll be going through another sutta, so we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start going through the discourse. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the discourse we'll be looking at this morning is from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 9, sutta number 14, which is called the Samiddhi Sutta, the discourse to Venerable Samiddhi. So as usual, I'll be going through the discourse in Pāli and giving some translation and explanation as we go along. And then I'll take any questions at the end. So if you, at any point during the talk, if you have any questions related to the sutta, please put them in the comments and I'll answer them after I've gone through the discourse. So the discourse begins, Atiko ayasma samiddhi yena ayasma sariputta tenu upasankame. So then Venerable Samiddhi approached Venerable Sariputta. So Venerable Sariputta, of course, was the foremost of the Buddha's bhikkhu disciples in wisdom. And Venerable Samiddhi is one of the less well-known bhikkhus from the time of the Buddha. He appears in, this actually doesn't show up that much. He's relatively rarely mentioned. Whereas, of course, Venerable Sariputta appears all over the place. And in fact, many of the suttas in the Sutta Pitaka are delivered by Venerable Sariputta. And there's also many suttas which involve Sariputta answering questions. So in this case, this discourse takes the form of Venerable Samiddhi asking Venerable Sariputta a series of questions. So the sutta continues, Upasankametra ayasmatang sariputang abhivadetva. So after approaching, he paid respects to Venerable Sariputta and ekamantang nisidi, and he sat down to one side. So this was standard in the time of the Buddha, so you would never sit directly in front of a teacher. You'd always sit at least slightly to one side. And ekamantang nisendang ko ayasmatang samiddhing ayasma sariputta eteravocha. So when he was seated to one side, Venerable Samiddhi said to Venerable Sariputta, and here begins the question. So his first question, he says, Kim a ramana Samiddhi purasasa sankappa vitaka upajanti. So based on what do thoughts and attitudes arise for a person? So aramana means a basis or object. So on what basis or on what object do sankappa and vitaka? So vitaka means thought, and in the suttas, the term vitaka normally refers to discursive thought or verbalized thought. And sankappa has the meaning of attitude. So the word sankappa actually by itself literally means preparation. But in the suttas, it normally has the meaning of attitude. And actually in some places, its meaning is almost synonymous with thought. But it usually has the meaning of attitude or motivation or intention. And of course, the place where we're most familiar with the word sankappa is in the Noble Eightfold Path as the second path factor. So samma sankappa is right attitude or right motivation or right intention or right thought. So that's where we normally encounter the word sankappa. So here, sankappa vitaka It could be taken as a single compound, which just means thoughts, but I think more likely is that this is a list. So vitakka meaning thought in the more discursive, verbal, fully formed thought, and sankappa in the sense of attitudes or intentions or motivations of mind. So more non-verbal inclinations of mind rather than fully formed thoughts. Again, so actually I had this a bit backwards. It's Sariputta asking Samiddhi these questions. So I had said a moment ago it was Samiddhi asking Sariputta, but it's actually the other way around. So Venerable Sariputta is asking Samiddhi these series of questions. It's unclear if the point here is to test Samiddhi's understanding or if it's to get Samiddhi to speak Dhamma. But either way, this is the form of Sariputta asking Samiddhi a series of questions. So he's asking Samiddhi, first off, so based on what, or dependent on what object, do thoughts and inclinations appear in the mind? And Samiddhi replies, Nama Rupa Ramana Bhante. So he says, means using the term Bhante because he's speaking to a senior monk. So he says, Nama Rupa Ramana. So the basis is Nama Rupa, which is mind and body. So Nama Rupa, it means mind and body. So it refers to our experience of physicality and mentality. So our experience of body and mind. So he's saying that thoughts and mental inclinations, so thoughts and attitudes, arise based upon mind and body. And then Venerable Sariputta asks, Te pana Samiddhi qua nanatang gachanti. So those, those, gachanti, go. Nanatang means diversity or variety. And kwa means where. So he's saying, where do those go to diversity? Where do those become diversified? So where does that become divided up into multiple different categories or multiple different objects or multiple different experiences? And Samiddhi replies, dhatusu Bhante. So in the dhatus, in the elements. And this is a bit obscure here because in the suttas, the term dhatu is used to refer to several different ways of analyzing our experience. So one of the more common ways the word dhatu is used is to refer to the 6 elements. So earth, water, heat, wind, space, and consciousness. So the 6 aspects of the body-mind experience. The term dhatu is also sometimes used in a broader sense to mean any of the underlying aspects of reality. So the one very simple division is between the sankata dhatu, so the element of conditioned phenomena, of discrete phenomena, and the asankata dhatu, which is the element of the unconditioned, which is nibbana. So that's another way that the term dhatu is used. And in the suttas, there's a few more rare cases of the word dhatu being used to describe the 6 senses or other aspects of our experience. So the basic idea of the term dhatu is that a dhatu is any of the basic building blocks of experience, any of the basic building blocks of our subjective experience of the world. So since the sutta doesn't specify exactly which of the different lists of dhatus is being referred to, we can just take it in its most general broad sense. So dhatu in the sense of the basic building blocks of our experience. And so Sariputta then further asks, he says, Te pana Samiddhi king samudaya. So he says, what is the origin of these things? Again, the sutta is not completely clear when he's saying they. Is he referring back to the original question about sankappa and vitakka? Or is he referring to the previous question, the item in the previous question? And actually, I think that this sutta makes the most sense if we take each question as always referring back to sankappa vitakka, always referring back to thoughts and inclinations. So again, the first question is saying, based on what do thoughts and inclinations arise? And he says, based on body and mind. Then he's saying, where do thoughts and inclinations become diversified? And it's, well, among the elements, among the different components of our experience. That's where we have different thoughts and different motivations and different attitudes based upon the different discrete objects that we seem to be encountering, the different distinct aspects of our experience. We have different thoughts depending on the different aspects of what we're going through. And so his next question then is, what do these thoughts and inclinations, what's their origin? What are they based on? And Samiddhi answers, Phassa samudaya. He says they're based on sense contact. In other words, whenever we have any kind of sensory experience, then we will tend to produce thoughts. We will tend to produce mental inclinations, tendencies of mind. We'll tend to produce attitudes, intentions, motivations, based upon whatever sensory experiences we're currently having. So this is also pointing to the conditional nature of the mind. It's pointing to the fact that the objects and activities of mind are heavily dependent upon what sensory experiences we're currently having. So again, we often have this idea that we're in full control of our own mind, and my mind is me, my mind is who I am. But actually, the majority of what's going on in our mind is directly dependent upon our conditions. It's dependent upon the people around us. It's dependent upon the sights and sounds and smells around us. It's dependent upon the country that we're in, the cultural context that we're in. All of these things directly affect the contents of the mind, directly affect the inclinations and patterns of thought. So then Sariputta asks, Te pana Samiddhi king samo sarana. So samo sarana means coming together or meeting or collecting. So he's saying, so where do all of these come together? Where do these mental activities, these thoughts and inclinations of mind, where do those collect together? And Samiddhi answers, Vedana samosarana. It says they come together around Vedana. So feeling is where these things come together. So this is pointing to the primacy of Vedana. So Vedana fundamentally is the experience of pleasure and pain. So normally the Buddha talks about three kinds of Vedana. So pleasant Vedana, Sukha Vedana, painful Vedana, so Dukkha Vedana, and neutral Vedana, Adukkama Sukha Vedana, neither painful nor pleasant. So these three basic kinds of sensation. So is it perceived as pleasant, perceived as painful, or perceived as neutral? And again, this is held up as being of critical importance because this is actually the primary steering mechanism in our life. So we steer towards pleasant things, we steer away from painful things, and we're mostly apathetic towards neutral things. So we mostly just don't care. We don't really pay any attention to neutral things. So this, again, we tend to think of ourselves as being these very complex individuals with advanced minds who have such refined and elaborate ways of relating to the world. But fundamentally, we steer towards pleasure, we steer away from pain, and we ignore neutral. That's basically what we do all the time, from cradle to grave, rinse and repeat 100 million times. Like, this is all we ever really do. And to do anything else with the mind takes incredibly strong effort and training. So again, we think of ourselves as being so intelligent and so clever, but actually we're just like a cat. We steer towards the pleasure and we steer away from the pain and we ignore the neutral. Repeat, repeat, repeat. endlessly going through these same bloody cycles of pleasure, pain, neutral. So this is where it all comes together. And actually the word samosarana, just to dig into this word a little bit. So the prefix sang, which means together or complete, and o, which means down, and sarana literally means running. So samosarana actually has a sense of running in circles. So we're just constantly running around Vedana. So again, samosarana, we might translate that as meeting, but a more literal meaning is running around. So he's saying, so what do all these thoughts and mental patterns, what do these all run around? He says, oh, they all run around Vedana. Again, we think we're such high-minded people, but actually we're just constantly running around pleasure and pain, just like every other sentient being. And then next Sariputta asks, he says, Te Panasamidhi King Pamukha. So of these thoughts and inclinations of mind, what is foremost? So Pamukha means the foremost, the highest. So Pamukha, it actually comes from the word mukha, which means face. And pa means towards. So Pamukha means like what's facing forwards, what's the foremost. And he answers, Samadhi Pamukha. Samiddhi, beloved. Finally, somebody else who loves Samadhi. So Samadhi Pamukha, it says Samadhi. Samadhi is the foremost. This is the forward facing of all the thoughts and inclinations. This is the most important one. And why is that? Why is Samadhi so important? So Samadhi is the unification and stabilization of mind. So it's bringing the mind together into a stable, unified alertness. And so of all the mental inclinations and patterns, this one is important because it's actually what allows us to at least temporarily put a halt to the running in circles that we normally do. And putting that to a halt, at least temporarily, allows the mind to become very clear and alert. So the mind can start to more precisely see and understand what's going on, both within our own mind and also within our sensory fields. And the next question Sariputta asks, it says, Te Panasamidhi King Adipateya. So Adipateya means the overlord. So he's saying, what's the overlord of all of these thoughts and inclinations? And Samiddhi replies, Sati Adipateya. So mindfulness, Sati. He says mindfulness is the overlord. And again, why is this? Well, because without mindfulness, you actually don't know what's going on. And if you don't know what's going on, then you can't do anything about it. So if we don't have self-awareness, if we're not clearly aware of what's going on in our mind, if we're not clearly aware of our actions and decisions and patterns, then we can't actually take control of the process and start to turn it towards the wholesome. So it's through the self-awareness that we can make choices which incline the mind towards awakening. So that's actually necessary for everything else in the path. So it's necessary for samadhi. It's necessary for just ordinary basic goodness. And it's also definitely necessary for the cultivation of wisdom. So he's saying the overlord of our thoughts and inclinations is mindfulness. The next question he says, Te Panasamidhi King Uttara. So Uttara means the highest, the supreme. So what's the highest of all thoughts and inclinations of mind? And he answers, Panyuttara. Panya is the highest. Wisdom. So Panya is this discerning wisdom, which clearly sees the true nature of things, clearly sees the anicca dukkha anatta, the impermanent, unsatisfying, impersonal nature of all things. And that's, of course, the highest, because panya is what leads the mind towards awakening. It's what leads the mind towards complete freedom from all defilement and delusion. which is the next question that Sariputta asks. He says, Te Panasamidhi King Sara. So what is the essence of all these thoughts and intentions? What is the essential flavor? What's the most important aspect or characteristic? So Sara has the sense of the most valuable of all things. So what's the most valuable of thoughts and inclinations? And he replies, Vimutti Sara, liberation. So Sara, again, it means essence or heartwood, or that which has the highest value, that which is the most important. So he's saying of all thoughts and mental inclinations, the most valuable, the most important is vimutti, it's liberation, which again, it means liberation from greed, hatred, and delusion. So freedom from the root poisons of the mind, the fires of the mind. And then the final question that he asks, he says, Te Panasamidhi King Ogada. So Ogada means literally it means immersion. So what one becomes immersed in or steeped in. But it also has the sense of the culmination, the final destination of something. So he's saying, what is the culmination, the final destination of all of these? What are these thoughts and inclinations? What do they finally plunge into? What do they finally immerse into? Another way of taking it is, what are they already immersed in? Which, when we get to his answer, makes this answer very interesting. So he's saying, what are all these thoughts and attitudes? What are they immersed in? What are they steeped in? What are they soaked in? And he answers, Amata Ogada. They're immersed in the deathless. So what are all our thoughts and attitudes and inclinations of mind? What are all of these immersed in? They're immersed in the deathless. So part of why this is an interesting statement is, one way of interpreting this is that he's pointing to the fact that the asankata dhatu, so the element of the unconditioned, it's all pervasive. It's not actually anywhere other than here and now. So the mind is always immersed in the deathless. The mind is always immersed in the unconditioned. It's just normally we don't recognize that because we're so fixated on the conditioned. We're so fixated on objects. We're so fixated on temporary limited experiences that we don't recognize the element of the unconditioned. We don't recognize the deathless. Even though the mind is already completely immersed in the deathless, we don't recognize that because we're so distracted by the fleeting objects passing through the mind. So that's if we take the word ogada, its ordinary sense of meaning immersion. So the mind is already immersed in the deathless. We just don't recognize it. But if we take ogada in the sense of that which one plunges into, or that which one dives into, then what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to dive into the deathless. We're trying to immerse ourselves completely in the nibbana dhatu, in the element of complete awakening. So this is another way of taking this final statement. But actually, I think that taking it in its most literal sense, so the literal sense of meaning what one is immersed in or steeped in, it's like, well, we're already immersed in the deathless. If we just turn our attention towards it, we'll see that it's already here and it's been here all along. Then Sariputta then repeats Samiddhi's statement. So he goes through the whole thing. He says, when I asked what are thoughts and inclinations based on, or what do they arise based on? And you said body and mind. When I asked where do they become diversified, you said among the elements. When I asked what their origin is, you said sense contact. When I asked what they run around, you said they run around Vedana, around feeling. When I asked what their foremost is, you said samadhi. Yay, samadhi. When I asked what is their overlord, you said mindfulness. When I asked what is supreme, what is highest, you said of them, you said wisdom. When I asked what is the most valuable of them, what's the heartwood, you said liberation. When I asked what is it immersed in, you said it's immersed in the deathless. And then Sariputta says, sadhu, sadhu, Samiddhi. And he says, excellent, excellent, sadhu, sadhu. And he says, sadhu ko tvang Samiddhi, putto putto visjajesi. Says, so Samiddhi, it's excellent that when asked, you were able to answer. So visajesi means like you satisfied, you gave a thorough and complete answer. And he says, tena cha ma manye. So this is an interesting statement. So he ends with this little warning. Manyi, so from the verb manyati, the literal meaning of manyati means to conceptualize. So to form a concept about something. And in the suttas, it usually has the sense of a misconcept or a limited concept, an incomplete or inaccurate concept of something. Tena chama manyi, one way of translating this would be, and don't conceptualize it or don't misconceptualize it. Like don't take all of this and just make it into another mental object that you then become fixated on. So one way of taking this is Sariputta saying, like, don't just make this into another knick-knack that you stick on the shelf of your mind, but rather recognizing that this is meant to be guidelines for how to direct the mind towards awakening. That these thoughts are not just meant to be pretty things that you stick on a shelf, but rather they're meant to be tools that help us to free the mind from greed, hatred, and delusion. So don't just make it into a concept. Again, recognizing that often when we conceptualize something, then we get fixated on the concept itself, and we miss what the concept is pointing to. And also often we get caught up on the limitations of the concept. So a concept is only ever an approximation of the real thing. So fixation on the concept, then we can get, again, we lose the reality of it. We get caught up in this approximation of something and miss out on the thing itself. And the other way the word manyati is used is in the sense of conceit. So related to the word mana, which can mean conceit. So tena chama manyi can also mean, and don't get conceited about this. So there's two ways of taking this. And actually I tend to take it in the most direct way, which is don't conceptualize this. Don't get lost in this as just being another mental object to stick on your mind shelf. Another thing to clutter up the closets of your mind. That's how I think is most likely what this is meant to say. Tena chama manyi, like don't conceptualize this. But the other potential meaning is, again, like don't become conceited about this. It's like, okay, yeah, you've got a good grasp of the Dhamma, but don't get all puffed up and arrogant just because you're able to answer some questions about Dhamma. And often, I suspect in many cases in the suttas, when there is a clear double meaning like this, it's quite possible that the double meaning was intentional. So especially with somebody like the Buddha or Venerable Sariputta, these were people who were masters of eloquence. So when there's a clear double meaning where both meanings have a clear Dhamma sense to them, it's quite possible that both meanings are intended. So that's the end of this sutta. So we can pay respects to the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I'll take any questions that you might have. So first off, hello to all the people joining online. So hello to John, Vivian, Douglas, Richard, Bhante Pundit, good to see you. Come and visit us sometime. Hello to Manal, Matthias, Morgana, Yankee, Edward, Bhumika, Jayanta, Niranjan, Usha, Don, Prina, Amaranta, Jessica, Rick, Laxmikant, Arshad. Welcome to all of you. And it looks like there's a couple of questions. So Prina has a question about wanting to become a monastic, but that's a bit off the topic of the sutta. So I recommend bringing that to monk chat. We're doing monk chat tomorrow evening.
No, this evening.
This evening.
Yeah.
So this evening we have our weekly Q&A session, our monk chat session, where you can ask any questions you want. So that would be the best time to bring that question to. So Naranjan says, Sama means evenly and Adi means continuously. Am I right? No. In terms of the word samadhi, no, that's not the etymology of the word samadhi. So it's true that sama can mean evenly, but the word samadhi is not from the word sama. The word samadhi, the prefix is sang, which means together or complete, and di, which means to hold. And in between, we have another prefix a, which has the sense of towards. So adi, together, means to collect or to gather or to hold or maintain. So samadhi then means to collect together and hold together. So this is samadhi. Samadhi is collecting and holding together the mind. So it's gathering together the mind into a unified, stable singularity. So this is samadhi practice. It's unification and stabilization of mind, making the mind unified and stable. And Don says, reminds very much of the Bhante Sutta, not to conceptualize, falling into concepts creates for or against. Yeah. I see what you're saying. There's a slightly similar flavor to the Bhante Sutta, though the content is different. There's a similar underlying flavor. And Richard asks, can a sustained level of samatha reduce the arising volitional formations behind thoughts? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the big perks of practicing, any samatha practice, including samadhi practices. So samatha and samadhi are not the same thing, by the way. So samadhi is a form of samatha, but there are forms of samatha which are not necessarily samadhi practices. So these two words are not quite synonymous, though there's a lot of overlap between them. But yeah, it's true. Like constantly maintaining a certain level of samatha will definitely greatly reduce the amount of thought activity that appears in the mind, and will also reduce the underlying sankharas. And also it makes it clearer what the underlying sankharas are, so that we can bring the process of wisdom to them, which also tends to reduce the thought formations. That's the last question online. Are there any questions from the monastery residents? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on that last line, and also one of the comments talking about conceptualizing things. And I feel like this sutta is something that I can apply intelligence to very straightforwardly, but when it comes to applying this practically, I'm not entirely sure how to use it on anything more than an intellectual level.
I'm not quite sure I follow what you're saying. Can you clarify?
I'm trying to understand how I can use the information that I've gained from this sutta on a practical level, rather than intellectualizing what Venerable Samiddhi is saying.
Yeah, well, actually, what comes to mind is the Madhupindika Sutta, which is actually pointing to a similar thing. So the Madhupindika Sutta is pointing to how mental complications, so papancha, this elaborate mental complexities, arise based upon sensory experiences. So, for example, we hear something, and based upon that sound, then we start to produce thoughts and ideas. And we make those thoughts and ideas increasingly complicated and elaborate, and we build stories around them, and we bring in memories, and within a very short period of time, usually less than a second, we're completely immersed in a mental world which doesn't actually have anything to do with the sound. Like you just hear like the little like metal clank of the radiator, and then like half a second later, you're off thinking about what your sister said to you when you were 14, and how much you really want to go to Disney World, and you don't even realize that all of this actually came just from this simple metallic clunking noise. So that's part of what he's pointing to here. So for example, he points to Pasa Samudaya. He says, so all of these sankappa vitaka, so all of these mental thoughts and inclinations, ultimately they arise from sensory contact. So trying to bring our attention to the sensory contact that spurred all of this. And sometimes if you catch your thoughts quickly enough, you can do this. Like you notice like, oh, and then my sister started talking about Disney World, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? What caused this? And you realize like, oh, because that metallic clunking noise reminded me of the time when my sister hit a metal object and it made almost exactly the same clunky noise. So then that got me thinking about my sister. So you're like, okay, so it was just a metallic clunky noise that then sparked a memory. And then I just immediately got on that horse and started running, because it's just so much fun to run away with our thoughts. But we notice how, you can notice how, again, it came from just a simple sensory contact. So that's one thing that he's pointing to here. Again, normally we get so caught up in our thoughts without even realizing that the thoughts are just, one, building on themselves. So they kind of generate their own internal world that feels self-contained. But actually that thought world arose from some kind of simple sensory contact, which usually doesn't really have anything to do with the thoughts themselves. So that's one way of applying this practically, just to pick one example from the list.
So to clarify, your answer is then how we can practically respond to when we recognize that this kind of thing is happening, that our mind creates these thoughts based on sensory experiences. The practical application of this knowledge would be to have sati and to pay attention to the fact that it's happening, just be aware of it. Then. Is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely an element of it. So it's recognizing, well, I mean, sati is important because you need to have sati even to recognize what's going on. But here what I'm talking about is tracing it back. So just picking one of them. And I could talk for several minutes about each phrase in this sutta, because like each of Samiddhi's answers is a self-contained practice, which can be done in depth. But the one I was specifically zeroing in on was Pasa Samudaya. So that all of our mental thoughts and activities and inclinations of mind are ultimately arising from sensory contact. So whenever we notice we're starting to get involved in thoughts and mental inclinations, immediately ask, what was the origin of this? What started this? What was the sensory contact that started this? And that has a way of completely deflating that whole mass of papancha before it gets any bigger. Okay. Actually, I would love to go through each one of these phrases and talk for about 10 minutes about each one, because actually each one is can be used as a meditation practice. Another example is actually the final one, amita ogada, so immersion in the deathless. Actually, this is the practice of anamitta samadhi. Anamitta samadhi, objectless concentration, or silent illumination practice. So it's the practice of becoming aware of the deathless, which the mind is already immersed in. Again, it's already here. We just don't pay any attention to it because we're so fixated on objects. So by not paying attention to objects, then one becomes aware of the underlying objectlessness, the asankata dhatu, the unconditioned, the deathless. So this is one of the practices that the Buddha talks about in the suttas. Yeah, again, I could go on for another hour or so about this sutta, but I think that's enough for now. Yeah. You had a question?
Yes, sir. Bring it back to my, very common, very common prescription for the monks is like they guard the doors of the sense faculties, and bringing it up in reference to from what do they originate? They originate from contact. There's all this mental activity. Bear with me, I have to sort out my question here as a phrase this, but it's like someone is practicing to be mindful of contacts, and they're mindful, having touched this contact, all this mental activity arises. That's one case. And then another case, someone contemplates, the dispassion of it. Someone like it would be craving, which proliferates all mental activity. Then someone contemplates like all the arhats are free from craving, they don't jump out onto all that mental activity, and someone gains steady concentration on that sort of reflection, like all the arhats are free from craving. And they use that as a remedy or a tool in reference to having touched these contacts. Maybe arhats don't launch out onto these contacts. Do you follow me?
No, not really.
Is that? I guess what I'm asking, is that a practice that you've seen or that makes sense to you?
Are you following?
A little bit, but
I mean, I get what you're saying about how because arhants are free of craving, they don't get caught up in sensory contact. That's definitely true.
I guess another way, spending time with Adhyayik, it's like you hear something, someone says something, and automatically it's like, I know all about this. That's one way to respond. The mind just wants to run with it. Like you said, before I know it, my mind is halfway around the world.
I think you're talking about self-restraint, essentially, how to put self-restraint within the context of this sutta.
Yeah, exactly. In the context of sense contacts.
Yeah, so the way the Buddha normally describes sense restraint is manamittagahi, ma bhyanjanagahi. So not to fixate on the details and characteristics of things. So, and what he says there is because when we fixate on details and characteristics, then the mind can fall into desire and aversion. So that's where, if a sensory experience is happening, which is prone to causing desire and aversion, then you don't pay attention to those details and characteristics, because if you do, it's just going to make the desire and aversion stronger. So, for example, if there's a chocolate cake on the counter, and you know that when you stare at the cake, then your desire to devour the cake keeps increasing until eventually you throw the precepts out the window and get a fork, or possibly not even a fork, you might just go at it with your hands. Then the proper solution is don't look at the cake. So that's an example of sense restraint. So don't fixate on the pleasantness of it. Or if there's somebody in the room who you're attracted to, don't fixate on their attractive characteristics. Actually, if you can find something, if you need to look at the person, find some aspect of them that is not attractive. So I've actually used this to great results. I remember when I was a junior monk, at one point a really stunningly attractive person came to the monastery, but they had bad teeth. So whenever I had to look at them, I just looked at their teeth. And I was just like, wow, those teeth are just awful. And then that made it so that I didn't get caught up in all the other stunningly beautiful aspects of their appearance. Instead, I chose the one part that was not beautiful to fixate on. So this is an example of sense restraint. So when the Buddha is talking about sense restraint, he's talking about being selective about what parts of our experience we focus on by understanding which sensory experiences will increase defilement and which sensory experiences will decrease defilement. So that's a somewhat different practice than what's being talked about here. But there is a relationship because, again, he's saying that sankappa and vitakka arise based upon phassa, based on sense contact. So this is also in the context of sense restraint, it's paying attention to how certain kinds of sensory contact can trigger our defilements, our tendencies towards unwholesome states of mind. Mm-hmm. And so to be selective about the kind of sensory contact that we pursue so that we're not building up more fuel for our defilements. Mm-hmm. Does that help?
Exactly. And also it's so much easier to, make clear what I was trying to ask earlier. It's essentially like, so there's an attractive object and that would be a cause for a lot of mental activity. And then, looking externally at someone's teeth, you not get very excited. But what I was asking earlier is also there's an internal object, which is not going to cause so much excitement, right? I think that's the goal of the practice. Like to internalize that counterpart, to counteract, an exciting object.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And Ethan, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a follow-up question about your phrasing. For the Namupadamuna part, the first answer. Mm-hmm. When you say mind and body, do you mean this individual mind and body or all mental and physical experience? Does the Namarupa, does that refer to all all objects, mental, like all experience basically, and then it's the elements or the ways that is differentiated? Or is it just that the thoughts are arising on the basis of our personal internal Namarupa? If that makes sense.
I'm not really sure I understand the distinction that you're making, because mind is mind, so it's the mental aspect of our experience, and body is the physical aspect of our experience. And even that distinction breaks down on closer examination, but it's one of the coarser ways that we can talk about things is mind and body. For example, one could quite reasonably say that the experience of that bookshelf is part of body. So even though one way of talking is my body is here and the bookshelf is over there, another way of talking is that bookshelf is part of the experience of body because it's part of one of the five physical senses of the six senses. So it's within the domain of seeing, therefore it's part of body experience.
That's what I was asking, if you were including that as like external sense as part of body and mind as well.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe this is a little bit off topic, but it's related to what you're saying, so if it's not related, that's okay. But in the Samiddhi Sutta, SMP 3.6, one of the verses is Anuvicca papanchanam rupam ajhatam bahidha rogamulam. So the root of studying papanchanam rupa, internally and externally, the root of disease. I'm wondering if that's the same type of thing, like is papanchanam rupa the proliferation of all our namarupa experience, or would you consider that as referring to something else?
So what you could do is email us that exact sutta reference or write it down for us, and then we'll do a sutta study on it. Because that sounds like another fun sutta to go through. So I'd rather give that sutta its full undivided attention one of these mornings. Yeah, and I always appreciate sutta requests, and I think that sounds like a good one.
That should be tomorrow's sutta.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we have one each.
And any other questions before we close for the morning? Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude the session with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.